She had everything wealth could buy. Power, status, servants at her command, and a husband who stood at Pharaoh's right hand. Her home was a palace, her wardrobe fit for royalty, and her word was law within those walls. Yet inside, she was empty, restless, consumed by desires that no amount of luxury could satisfy. And when a young Hebrew slave entered her household, bringing with him an integrity she had never known, something dark awakened within her. What began as temptation became obsession. What started as seduction ended in rage. And what she meant for evil, God would turn into the salvation of nations. This is the story of Potiphar's wife, a woman whose name history forgot, but whose choices changed the course of destiny forever. Our story takes place in ancient Egypt, around 1900 BC, during the height of the Middle Kingdom. Egypt was a land of splendor and sophistication, where the Nile River brought life to an otherwise barren desert, where pyramids stood as monuments to eternal power, and where Pharaoh ruled as a living god over millions. In this magnificent kingdom lived a man named Potiphar. He wasn't just any Egyptian official. The Bible tells us he was one of Pharaoh's officers, the captain of the guard, a position of immense power and trust. He commanded the royal security forces, oversaw the palace guard, and likely managed the prison system where political prisoners and criminals were held. He was wealthy beyond measure, living in a grand estate with countless servants, fine furnishings, and all the luxuries Egypt could offer. And he had a wife. Her name is never given in scripture, but her actions would echo through history. She lived in opulence, surrounded by servants who catered to her every whim. Silks from distant lands draped her body. Gold and precious stones adorned her neck and wrists. Perfumes from exotic spices filled her chambers. She had everything a woman of that era could want: status, security, and power within her household. But there was something missing. Potiphar, consumed by his duties to Pharaoh, was often absent. His position demanded long hours at the palace, managing security, coordinating the guard, handling matters of state. His wife was left alone in their grand estate, surrounded by luxury but starving for attention, for excitement, for something to fill the void inside her. She had servants, yes, but servants kept their distance. They obeyed, but they didn't engage. They feared her authority but couldn't satisfy her craving for connection, for passion, for something real in a life that felt increasingly hollow despite all its glitter. Then one day, everything changed. A new slave entered their household, a young Hebrew man named Joseph. And from the moment he arrived, he was different from every other servant in that house. Joseph's story was already tragic. He had been betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, and sold to Midianite traders who brought him to Egypt. Just 17 years old, torn from his family, stripped of his colorful coat that marked him as his father's favorite, and sold in an Egyptian slave market like a piece of property. He had every reason to be bitter, angry, and rebellious. But Joseph carried something the other slaves didn't have: a relationship with the living God. And wherever Joseph went, God's presence went with him. It didn't take long for Potiphar to notice that everything Joseph touched prospered. Crops yielded more. Livestock multiplied. Household affairs ran smoothly. Business dealings succeeded beyond expectation. There was something about this Hebrew slave that set him apart. So Potiphar promoted him. First to oversee a portion of the household, then more, and eventually, Joseph was made overseer of everything Potiphar owned. The Bible tells us that from that time on, the Lord blessed Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. Potiphar was so confident in Joseph that he didn't concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Everything else, the entire estate, the servants, the finances, all of it was in Joseph's hands. Joseph was no longer just another slave. He was the most trusted person in the household. He had authority over everyone and everything. He managed the estate with wisdom and integrity. And he was young, handsome, and constantly present in the house. Potiphar's wife noticed. How could she not? While her husband was away at the palace day after day, Joseph was there, moving through the estate with quiet confidence, commanding respect from the other servants, making decisions, solving problems. And unlike the other servants who cowered before her, Joseph carried himself with dignity. He had something in his eyes, a sense of purpose, of moral clarity, that was utterly foreign to the corrupt Egyptian court culture she knew. At first, perhaps it was just curiosity. Who was this Hebrew slave who had risen so quickly? What made him so different? Why did her husband trust him so completely? But curiosity became fascination. Fascination became attraction. And attraction became obsession. She began watching him. Noticing when he entered a room. Finding excuses to be where he was working. Dressing more carefully, wearing more perfume, positioning herself where he would see her. The servants noticed, though they said nothing. They saw the way her eyes followed Joseph. They saw her linger in places she'd never cared about before. Joseph, for his part, kept his distance. He was respectful but reserved. Professional but not personal. He understood the boundaries. This was his master's wife. To even acknowledge her advances would be betrayal of the worst kind. So he focused on his work, avoided being alone with her when possible, and prayed for wisdom. But she was relentless. Day after day, she became bolder. Subtle hints became open stares. Casual conversations became loaded with innuendo. She was used to getting what she wanted. She was the mistress of the house. Men didn't refuse her. Servants obeyed her commands. Who was this slave to resist her? Finally, she stopped being subtle. One day, when the household was quiet and the other servants were occupied elsewhere, she found Joseph alone. Her eyes locked on his, and she spoke words that would change everything. "Come to bed with me." It wasn't a request. It wasn't a flirtation. It was a command, spoken by a woman who expected obedience, who believed her status gave her the right to take what she wanted. In her mind, this was simply the privilege of power. She was the mistress. He was the slave. What choice did he have? But Joseph's response shocked her. He refused. Not just quietly, not just by walking away, but with words that cut to the heart of the matter. He reminded her that his master trusted him with everything in the entire estate. Nothing was withheld from his authority except her, because she was Potiphar's wife. Then he said something that revealed the depth of his character. "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Notice what Joseph said. He didn't say, "How could I betray your husband?" though that would have been true. He didn't say, "What if we get caught?" though that was a real danger. He said it would be sin against God. Joseph's morality wasn't based on convenience or fear of consequences. It was rooted in his relationship with the Creator. He knew God saw everything. He knew that purity mattered to God. He knew that no moment of pleasure was worth compromising his integrity before the Lord. Potiphar's wife was stunned. Men didn't refuse her. Slaves didn't lecture her about morality. This wasn't how things worked. But rather than respect his integrity, rather than feel shame at her behavior, she became more aggressive. Day after day, she approached him. Day after day, she pressured him. Day after day, Joseph refused. He wouldn't give in to her advances. He wouldn't even be in the same room with her if he could avoid it. The Bible tells us that though she spoke to him day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Can you imagine the strength that took? Joseph was young, far from home, surrounded by a pagan culture where sexual immorality was normalized. He was a slave with no power, being pursued by the most powerful woman in the household. One word from her could make or break his life. But he held firm. His fear of God was greater than his fear of her. His commitment to purity was stronger than his desire for pleasure or advancement.
If you're finding this story compelling and challenging, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful biblical stories to life. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another story of faith, failure, and redemption.
Then came the day everything exploded. It was one of those rare occasions when the household was nearly empty. Most of the servants had duties elsewhere. Potiphar was at the palace. The house was quiet. And Potiphar's wife saw her opportunity. She had been rejected too many times. Her pride was wounded. Her obsession had grown into something dark and twisted. She wasn't asking anymore. She was taking. Joseph entered the house to attend to his duties, and she was waiting. This time, she didn't just speak. She grabbed him. Her fingers clutched his cloak, pulling him toward her chamber. "Come to bed with me," she demanded. But Joseph did the only thing he could do. He ran. He tore himself away from her grasp so forcefully that his cloak remained in her hands, and he fled the house. He left his garment behind, left his dignity in her clutches, left everything except his integrity. And he ran because sometimes, fleeing temptation is the only option. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is run. Potiphar's wife stood there, holding Joseph's cloak, her face burning with humiliation. She had been rejected again, but this time publicly, physically, undeniably. The slave she desired had literally run away from her. Her obsession turned to rage in an instant. If she couldn't have him, she would destroy him. She called for the other servants. When they came running, she showed them the cloak and spun a story that was pure poison. "That Hebrew slave your husband brought us came in here to make sport of me. But when I screamed for help, he ran, leaving his cloak beside me." It was a masterful lie, weaponizing the very evidence of Joseph's innocence. The cloak he left behind in his desperate flight to maintain purity became the proof of an attempted assault. She painted herself as the victim and Joseph as the predator. And because she was Egyptian nobility and he was a Hebrew slave, who would doubt her word? She kept the cloak beside her until Potiphar came home. Then she told him the same lie, adding dramatic details about how terrified she was, how violated she felt. And she made sure to emphasize that this happened because Potiphar had brought this Hebrew into their house. Potiphar burned with anger. The Bible doesn't tell us whether he fully believed his wife's story. He knew Joseph's character. He knew his own wife's temperament. But what choice did he have? To doubt his wife publicly would dishonor his household. To side with a slave over his wife was unthinkable in Egyptian society. His hand was forced. So he had Joseph arrested and thrown into prison. Not just any prison, but the royal prison where Pharaoh's prisoners were confined. It was a place of darkness, suffering, and hopelessness. For Joseph, it must have felt like the ultimate betrayal. He had done everything right. He had resisted temptation when many would have given in. He had honored God, honored his master, maintained his integrity. And this was his reward: prison. But here's what Potiphar's wife didn't understand. She thought she was destroying Joseph. She thought her lie would ruin him forever. She thought she was writing the ending to this story. But she was just writing another chapter in a story God was offering. She meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. In that prison, Joseph would interpret dreams for Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. The cupbearer would forget Joseph for 2 years, but eventually remember him when Pharaoh needed a dream interpreted. Joseph would be brought before Pharaoh, interpret his dream about 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine, and be elevated to second in command over all Egypt. The slave that Potiphar's wife tried to destroy became the man who saved Egypt and the surrounding nations from starvation. The Hebrew she attempted to ruin became the instrument God used to preserve the very family line that would eventually produce the Messiah. Her lie sent Joseph to prison, but God used that prison as the pathway to a palace. And what happened to Potiphar's wife? Scripture never mentions her again. She disappears from the narrative after her false accusation. We can only imagine her life afterward. Did she ever learn that the slave she falsely accused became the second most powerful man in Egypt? Did she hear that Joseph, now dressed in royal robes and riding in Pharaoh's chariot, was the one managing the food supply during the famine? Did guilt ever find her? Did she ever realize the magnitude of what she had done? We don't know. But we do know this: her moment of vindictive rage became a footnote in a much larger story. She thought she was in control, but she wasn't. She thought she could manipulate events to her satisfaction, but she couldn't. She thought her word was final, but it wasn't. So what can we learn from this dark chapter in Joseph's story? First, temptation comes to everyone, even those who are walking faithfully with God. Joseph was doing everything right. He was serving diligently, managing wisely, honoring God in everything. But temptation still found him. Being faithful doesn't mean you won't be tested. In fact, sometimes your very faithfulness makes you a target. Second, saying no to sin sometimes costs us everything. Joseph's refusal to compromise cost him his position, his freedom, and years of his life. Purity has a price. Integrity isn't free. There are times when doing the right thing will cost you your reputation, your career, your comfort. But God sees, and God rewards faithfulness even when others punish it. Third, lust unchecked becomes obsession, and obsession becomes destruction. Potiphar's wife didn't start out planning to destroy Joseph. It began with attraction, grew into desire, became obsession, and ended in rage. Sin always escalates. What starts as a look becomes a thought. What starts as a thought becomes a plan. What starts as a plan becomes an action. And what starts as an action becomes a habit that can destroy lives. Fourth, false accusations are devastating, but God is the ultimate judge. Joseph suffered unjustly. He was punished for a crime he didn't commit, accused of assault when he was actually fleeing temptation. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But God saw the truth, and eventually, truth won. You may face false accusations. People may lie about you. Your reputation may be damaged by those who should defend it. But remember, God knows the truth. And God will vindicate in His timing. Fifth, what people mean for evil, God can use for good. This is the theme of Joseph's entire life. His brothers meant to destroy him by selling him into slavery. Potiphar's wife meant to destroy him with false accusations. But God was weaving a tapestry of redemption through every betrayal, every injustice, every dark moment. The same is true in your life. The attacks against you, the injustices you suffer, the doors that close, God can use all of it to position you for His purposes. Finally, character in private determines destiny in public. Joseph's refusal to compromise when no one was watching prepared him to lead a nation when everyone was watching. The integrity he maintained in Potiphar's house qualified him to manage Pharaoh's house. Who you are when no one can see determines who you become when everyone is looking. The choices you make in secret shape the leader you become in public. Potiphar's wife represents something we all battle, the temptation to use power, position, and manipulation to get what we want regardless of who gets hurt. She had everything except self-control. She had status except humility. She had authority except integrity. And when she couldn't get what she wanted, she weaponized lies to destroy an innocent man. But Joseph represents something else, the power of unwavering commitment to God's standards even when it costs everything. He chose momentary loss over permanent compromise. He chose prison over sin. He chose God's approval over human advancement. And because he made that choice, God could trust him with a kingdom. The question for us today is simple: which will we choose? When temptation comes, will we flee like Joseph or embrace it like Potiphar's wife? When faced with the choice between integrity and advancement, between purity and pleasure, between what's right and what's easy, what will we do? Joseph's choice cost him years in prison, but it positioned him to save nations. Potiphar's wife's choice gave her momentary vindication, but it condemned her to permanent obscurity. One is remembered as a hero of faith. The other is remembered only as a warning. Your choices matter. Your integrity matters. Your private decisions matter. God is watching, not to condemn you, but to prepare you. He's testing you where you are to prepare you for where you're going. And like Joseph, if you remain faithful in the testing, you'll be trusted in the blessing. The same God who was with Joseph in Potiphar's house and in Pharaoh's prison is with you today. In your temptations. In your false accusations. In your unjust suffering. He sees. He knows. And He's writing a story that's bigger than your current chapter. What part of this story challenged you the most? Joseph's integrity? Potiphar's wife's destructive choices? The way God used injustice for good? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story impacted you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear about integrity and God's faithfulness. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful biblical story. Thank you for watching, and remember, your private integrity determines your public destiny. I'll see you in the next one.